Thanks everyone for coming here. Today I'm going to present on this spreadsheet that I put together, which is the exploration of forms of mindfulness and inner development. And it also covers a lot of other related concepts. There's a lot of these things that are coming together in my mind when I'm reading the Hansi books, I'm reading Wilber's books, watching all 50 hours of Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, and a lot of other related things that are out there. And there were some patterns that came together in my mind that in order to understand this, I needed to create a table. Now, Wilber has a lot of tables, but he didn't have one that was quite sliced and diced the way I thought things could come together. I took a stab at it here with this table. Now, let me go ahead and present that. Some of you guys can already see it, but I'm going to go ahead and show it, walk you guys through what I'm seeing. So we have, an outer world that we're all co-inhabiting, and which objectivity is important. And, science usually involves us studying and measuring so we can get on the same page with each other. We also have an inner world, and that's, that is one of the foundational tenets of not only integral theory, but also metamodernism. And then there's the notion of the distinction between subjective and intersubjective, and you also have within integral theory, you have that distinction between the objective and interobjective. Now, for this particular table, I'm just focusing on those, what we call within integral theory, the left quadrants, because there's already been a lot of taxonomies of the objective sciences. Notably, the work that I like the best is Greg Henriquez, and how he divides that into 4 planes. And there's definitely interconnections that those have to the inner world, but I couldn't really find good taxonomies of how to do more reliable processes for understanding the inner world. I mean, there's a lot of those out there. They just didn't seem to be organized as well as I would like. And so I'm putting this out there as a way of organizing that. It could be, inaccurate. It could be incomplete, and it's probably a little bit of an oversimplification in certain ways. But the idea is, what's the most basic and fundamental ways of having a granularity of these inner development practices or inner exploration practices that could, down the line, you could create psychotechnologies that bring them together in some ways, and also integrate these with objective sciences in some ways. So this is like, okay, what are the starting point? What are those, what is the granularity that we can start with? And these seem to align, in fact, with the Hansi Freineck books of the inner development dimensions, or those inner dimensions that are given there: code, state, depth, and complexity. I'm also seeing within Vervaeke's work, where he has the 4 P's of knowledge. At the ground, you have the participatory knowing. That's the, being able to know what it's like to actually do something in real time. And then you have the perspectival knowing. That's knowing what it's like to be there, to have a perspective on something. So the ground of knowing is participatory, and a little bit above that is having a perspective. And both of those contribute to the ability to knowing how to do something. That's the procedural knowing, and also the knowing what is true or what is not true, or having some sort of a beliefs about that, which is the propositional knowing. So I'm trying to, so that the idea is this is all related to phenomenology. There's a very long history of academic phenomenology, and there are different ways in which branches of phenomenology are sliced and diced. I was reading, for example, the Encyclopedia of Phenomenology put out by this organization called the Center for Advanced Research in Phenomenology. They identified the so-called transcendental phenomenology started from Edmund Husserl, and existential phenomenology started from Martin Heidegger. And then you had an integration with hermeneutic phenomenology, also kind of coming from Heidegger and taken up by other theorists since then. And I was thinking, how does this align with the so-called Wilberian quadrants? This all seems to be left quadrants, but then you also, it seems like these, the so-called existential and transcendental align with the upper left. That's the subjective, right? And the hermeneutic seems to align with the lower left. That's the intersubjective. So I'm also reading about Paul Ricoeur, who his argument was that you can't really do phenomenology without hermeneutics and vice versa. And it seemed like he was making a little bit of a distinction between core phenomenology as the subjective and the hermeneutic phenomenology as the intersubjective. So I was thinking, actually, I had an earlier version of this that had kind of just 3 rows, and I showed it to Layman Pascal, and he said, well, maybe you could bring this to 4 rows and make it like orthogonal, you know, and then I was thinking, how would I do that? And I realized this is last year when I was reading Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which I started reading because Vervaeke was talking about it quite a bit. And then it clicked. I was thinking, okay, well, if I'm trying to, looking just in general, I should probably say that notion of thinking fast and slow, that's system 1 and system 2. System 1 is the pre-reflective thought of the intuition, and the more deliberate thought is system 2. So there's quite a bit to that. But let's say we want to hone the system 1 thinking. We probably don't deliberate and try to meditate to try to get better at our automatic pre-reflective system 1 thinking, because we'd be using system 2 thinking to do that. So that really wouldn't work. So we probably have to have other kinds of practices to hone system 1 thinking. And then we probably likewise wouldn't want to use these, system 1 practices to hone system 2 thinking. So that's why it seemed like this kind of aligns here, where we have the upper left and the lower left can both be subdivided into system 1 and system 2. That seems the most reasonable way of doing things. And if you look at, the lower left, I then figured, okay, so system 1 is like an empathic hermeneutic that is more participatory. That's what we're doing right now. We're participating in a direct interpersonal, intersubjective communication. Especially if it involves people looking at each other eye to eye and having facial and hand gestures, direct participatory on everybody's part. And that is a little bit of a distinction then from having a perspective on the intersubjective, which that is probably people you aren't directly interacting with. So it seems like when you are participating directly in the intersubjective space, that works through system 1. And if you are instead having a perspective on it, then that is more system 2. So I took a stab at this. I have it sliced and diced that way. Does anybody have, before I move forward, does anybody have a question about just the general structure and why I have 4 zones here? That's basically something I wanted to make sure everybody was on board with and understanding before I get into the more details about the other columns and how they relate. You can go ahead and raise your hand if you have it. Yes, Emil.
Yeah, that was something I was wondering about. What are these zones about? I think, yeah, that would require that. It's the first row, so it demands an explanation, I'd say.
Well, yeah, actually, this zone thing, and again, this came from a discussion with Layman Pascal, where he was saying that once I showed him this version that had 4 rows, he was making a connection to the way Wilbur has he took the 4 quadrants and divided each of the quadrants into 2 zones. So he doesn't have it quite sliced and diced the same way I do here, but nonetheless, it seemed the word zone was a good name to use, at least for when you scroll over. You might not see what is essentially the primary key for, if you're familiar with that concept of a primary key. That's where every row of data needs one single key that differentiates it from everything else. But these 4 zones are actually just, those numbers are just artificial. They're just so that we can refer to them. And it worked for Wilbur. The way that he has it, though, if you look at his 8 zone model, and again, we're just looking at the first 4, he doesn't have it the same exact way, but his zone 3 and zone 4 are pretty close to what I have here. Pretty close. There's a difference, though, in his zone 1 and zone 2, because he has zone 1 as phenomenology and zone 2 is structuralism for some reason. I don't know why. So I'm offering this as a little bit of an improvement over that. I don't know if that makes sense, but again, these are just numbers, and they're just there just so that when you're scrolling over, you can look back and say, which row am I on? And some of this, if I go to the definitions tab, you can see an explanation of every row, and that at least gives an explanation. It's an attempt to do that. It's an attempt to explain that. So the real key to this is not only the integral quadrant, but then the system 1 and system 2 thinking, and also which of the 4 P's of knowing is primary. Like there is, I think I'm in agreement that the ground of being, or the ground of knowing, is participatory. But I think when we have ecologies of practice that are based on honing system 2 thought, those don't really get as deep as participatory. They start with honing your perspectival and system 2 thought. So that's why I have this differentiated here. And I imagine there's also ecologies of practice that start a little even further up on that stack. They're like if you're learning math, then you're just learning propositional knowing. You're not even getting into the more embodied participatory or perspectival. But that's I don't think that really goes into left quadrant stuff quite so much, or at least that's not something I really felt were necessary of including in this table. I mean, I suppose I could have added 4 rows for each quadrant, so there'd be a total of 8, because some of them start with participatory and some of them start with propositional and don't even get and are that disembodied. Maybe that's one way in which the table could have been structured, but that isn't as interesting. What is interesting to me are practices that either begin with participatory knowing or with perspectival knowing, and then build up from there. So you can have some sort of a ultimately coming to some propositions about things. Like, for example, all of this is propositional, isn't it? Where did it come from? Probably from some sort of embodied practice, and then we build up from there. And if there's anything in here that isn't accurate, we essentially go through the processes again and we refine it. So it's a little bit science-like in that regard. That's kind of what I'm trying to do, is to come up with something that might be outside the realm of science, but it's adjacent to science, in that it can be sort of reproducible and sort of, to an extent, reliable in providing us information, evidence-based understanding of our inner world, so that we can come to a better mutual understanding with each other about how we can live in peace with each other. I mean, that's ultimately, if you know, this is in line with Hansi's vision and a lot of other major thinkers of our time. Does that kind of make sense to you guys? Like, what the ultimate purpose of this is? Okay. Well, so then I can go on and I can say, okay, what for Hansi, in fact, what of the inner dimensions are what is that relation to these rows here in this table? And I would say that any of these practices probably has the ability to develop any of the dimensions that Hansi has identified. Now, in a few days ago, talking to Emil, there seemed to be an agreement that state isn't exactly a dimension. It's more of a that at any given time you can be in any state. So we don't say that. Probably isn't quite like the other three identified. So Emil suggested that maybe awareness could be instead a dimension, and that is you become more aware through certain like meditative practices, and that's probably also the dimension that is most closely associated with being able to be at a higher average state and also achieve higher overall states. But again, because state isn't a developmental dimension, it's not included in this table. And this is something I explain here in this in the dimensions. I'm sorry, the definitions tab. And I have I at first, in fact, just up to a couple of weeks ago, I had complexity as the dimension associated with this fourth row here, because I was figuring if you're going to understand culture at a deeper level, you're going to try to understand those goings on of different ideas and histories, and mutations of consciousness. If you're going to try to understand that depends on complexity more than any of the others. The other three here, you maybe can get by without really developing your complexity capability. And I still think that, except that I came to realize that this fourth one is a little bit more related to Kohlberg's stages of moral development. So that's why I switched it out. And this is everything in this table is open to discussion. I have complexity as actually the third one. And so just to tell you how this inner dimensions column works, I was thinking, because any of these dimensions can be developed through any of these practices, but there are some that are more closely correlated with others. It seemed pretty clear that, existential depth is associated with existentialism, right? And awareness is associated with this transcendental processes, these meditative processes where you transcend your natural attitude and you come to a deeper understand, a more clear awareness. So that's why these are that way with these numbers. But then, and then also I could say here with this empathic hermeneutic, that's the direct, participatory, intersubjective. You develop code through that more so than any of the others. And I needed another one for this cultural hermeneutic processes, and I that's why I have Kohlberg's moral development. It seemed that's something that fit a little better there, but this is all worth probably some discussions. Right now in this, I'm just kind of presenting it as it seemed to me, but probably in the coming weeks we could refine it a little better. So I'm going to open this up to, now that I've presented on how I see this relating to the inner dimensions, I'm going to let you guys give your thoughts or comments. So the first person I think would be Ben.
Yeah. Really cool, Brandon. Thank you. I just to repeat for everybody, I had never made the jump. I had read Systems 1, Systems 2 before in college. I had a background in neuroscience in college, and I had never made the connection ever. So that was actually really cool to see that. I'm interested in moral development and Kohlberg. I'm not really I don't know his work that well. Of course, I've heard it, but like you, I had initially thought it was complexity that would probably be sort of high on this inner development for zone 4, but maybe that's just because I'm ignorant of like Kohlberg's work. Basically, could you maybe just talk really quickly about why, maybe a little bit more, or just introduce Kohlberg's work for at least myself? I'm not aware.
Well, yeah, and actually, if you look at Kohlberg, it is probably very similar to the some of the stages within MHC already. So it's just that it's more based on not just MHC, which can be applied to all kinds of things, but then what are you doing with it? Now that you've developed that capability of understanding that level of complexity, what is your relation to how you go about your life? And so how do you like when you have a greater appreciation and understanding of your village, then you recognize how to act morally in that context, and you have that identity. So it's not just I identify with myself and I'm the only one who matters here, but then you are applying that to your actions and recognizing other interests. And ultimately the idea is that you get to the point where you actually have some care for the entire world, and all sentient beings, and you have some. So that does depend on reaching a certain level of MHC. I don't think you can get there if you're just of the formal stage or something like that. You need a little bit more than that. And in fact, I could change this back to say, I could remove moral and just say that's complexity. That it just seems like, because it's an application of it, and that just seems a little bit more specific to the situation there. So, and I suppose we can go to Emil.
Yeah, I noticed that, well, first of all, I noticed that you have 5 inner dimensions, and you have added like morals, ethics, I guess, as a 5th dimension. Then I also noticed there's a pattern here that complexity is always in the middle. Yeah,
I had to put it somewhere. I couldn't remove it.
You had to put it somewhere. I was just wondering if there's like some particular, because it's always like I'm looking for patterns, and I just wanted to, if you could say a little bit about that. Why is complexity in the middle but never the first? Like, what is the pattern that is trying to emerge here? I just wanted
I would have to just remove it, like, I suppose,
yeah.
or actually have it as something that could be rankable.
Yeah. Because there was another thing regarding the zones. Now I know what you're referring to. I remember that like years ago when integral theory started to with Wilber to become more fractal. Yeah, and but I only did it halfway, because if you just like Google, what did I Google? I Googled like Wilber and then the word zones, and then you see that each quadrant is divided into inside and outside. And I'm just asking myself, why didn't he go all the way and divide every single quadrant into inside, outside, singular, and plural? That's something we're going to talk about in one of the later sessions. Namely, the thing is, it's the fractal nature of the world that each quadrant can be divided into an additional 4 quadrants, and each of them can also be divided, theoretically speaking, into 4 quadrants, and that's like the nature of the 4 quadrants.
Yeah. So have you heard of David Long?
Yes.
So he did that.
Like David Long.
Yeah. He made a video about why that sort of like quadrants within quadrants, a total of 16, was superior to Wilber's like 8-zone model. And that I think that's a little bit distinct though from what I'm looking at here, because what he has is what David Long has is there's quadrants for epistemology and quadrants for ontology, and then you can then in turn, I think that's how he has it. I can't remember what he calls it. You can look at his video for that. Now, a few months ago, Wilber was on the integral stage, and he was kind of referring, I think, to that. He said, "I've heard of steam quadrants within quadrants, but probably we could just go with this 8-zone model as being more simple and reasonable." Or it was his response to David Long, I think, right? So this here though is not, I don't think it's really fractal. It is more, it is actually a little bit similar to that 8-zone model, but it's also kind of similar to how he has in his book, Marriage of Sense and Soul, he has the levels of understanding, the eye of flesh, the eye of mind, the eye of spirit. And then I was thinking, okay, this doesn't, how do you fit Heidegger and Husserl into this? Eye of flesh, eye of mind, eye of spirit. It didn't seem to really fit, because he doesn't really have, and this is something Layman Pascal has pointed out, he doesn't really have within that model for more commonplace, mundane experiences, and how those can then become honed into a flow state. That's the whole point of the existential phenomenology, and also for certain kinds of hermeneutic phenomenology and those ecologies of practice that are related to that. So he doesn't even have that, because the way he defines the eye of flesh is much more empirical. And then when you get into the eye of mind, that does get into the more kind of transcendental or meditative processes, but then it kind of skips over an important aspect of phenomenology. And so I'm trying to bring that in here, and I guess that's more closer to what I'm going with here, rather than the inside and outside of the quadrants as Wilber has it. So admittedly, what I have here is kind of a merger of two different things that Wilber has put together, as I was saying, with his book Marriage of Sense and Soul, and also that 8-zone model. And I can't remember which book it came that he has with that, and maybe it was I haven't read every single one of his books yet, so I'm just offering this as a little bit more of a streamlined way that is more in line with cognitive science and more in line with the branches of phenomenology. And if it turns out that my numbering these zones is causing confusion, which it maybe could because it's not the same zones as what Wilbur has, then I'll just remove that. I mean, but you can kind of get the point of, hopefully you kind of get the idea of the way I've have it structured here, and then maybe, right? And there are some other interesting correlations that I found with the inner development goals, how they have some categories, and as far as I could tell, with those categories, they have 5. You know, that's the being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting. And I was figuring that the relating and collaborating seem to correlate pretty nicely with the zone 3 and the zone 4. And being and thinking, probably I couldn't really see how one of those is more strongly correlated with zone 1 or zone 2. So I have them both as correlated here. And then acting, I was figuring, is more something that comes about from more of a inner world and outer world integration. So that's why I have it 3rd for each of these. Hopefully that makes some sense there. Yes, Emil.
Yeah, I'm looking at the other screen here. It's easier for me, so it's not because I'm looking at something more interesting. Something that caught my eye is that you have a row called shadow, very close to a row called conflict. I don't know if you could say a little bit about that.
Yes. Well, so I was figuring that, and in fact, this is something that came about, I should say, from one of the collaborators. If we go to the authors tab, one is Andrew Porter. So I posted a very early version of this on the Metamodern forum a few months ago. And so Andrew Porter, he and I had a discussion, and he had some ideas that he was working on with Lawrence Curry Clark. And a lot of this conflict column came from his work. And so the idea is that these different ecologies of practice and psychotechnologies can help you with certain problems in your life. And shadow can be defined as not just the problems or the things within you that you don't want to face, but also within a larger social group. So there's I can go to the definitions tab, and I can say the golden shadow. Was it Aaron Rodgers and I can't remember her name, but anyways, goldenshadow.org. They the two of them did a series on the Stoa, and I watched it, and I was thinking, okay, well, that seems the way that they are talking about different kinds of shadow, not just with the subjective realm, but also the intersubjective realm, that seems to align with, I figured I could correlate that here. So a lot of this I just pretty much copied from what they said. So the idea is that these practices can help you overcome those shadow, or integrate shadow in different ways, not just within you, but also within a social group, and can also deal with conflict. That would be, tension or cognitive dissonance or animosity or prejudice, right? Does that kind of make sense then? And so then I also have this relevance realization column, which comes from Vervaeke. I was figuring relevance realization is correlated somehow with each of these. There is also, I have, there's 4E cognitive science. You guys familiar with 4E cognitive science? This is something that Vervaeke is talking about as well, and other people. So the 4 E's are embodied, enacted, embedded, and extended. And that also seemed to correlate with this. I was figuring, though, that depending on how you define what is embodiment, you could almost see this concept of enactment or being embedded or extended as being types of embodiment. So then I was thinking, okay, if I was going to do that, I need a 5th E for this zone 2 for the more meditative processes, which then I said, okay, well, maybe that would be examined. So I'm making, some editorial decisions on how to do this. I'll admit that another way I could have done it is to just say that this cell here is embodied, and then this column would be something else, that something other than embodiment, to encompass all of those 4 E's, But I like it this way because there's 5 E's now. Does anybody have any questions on that? Hope I'm not blowing your minds. Or maybe you're just, in such disagreement with me that you don't need, you're speechless. One of the two. Let me see. Here's something, if I scroll over far enough, we might get to something that is going to be a little bit controversial in the Hansi sphere, and that is the most influential H population. Now, some people have already correlated the H populations with the development dimensions. So I do have it organized as in that way, and I don't remember if it was, I think it might have been Andrew Porter and Lawrence Clark who did that correlation, or maybe some other people. But then I also wanted to bring in a 5th E. I know there's or a 5th H, because we go to that column here, that definition. We can see how Jared Lucas had actually suggested that maybe there could be a 5th E harmonizers, right? And I was also having a hard time figuring out which of the rows hackers would correlate to. It seemed like the hackers actually, they work in not just left quadrant, but also right quadrant kind of integration. So that's not something that's covered within this table. I'm just looking at the granularities of more left quadrant inner development practices. And then later we can have more detailed understanding of how this comes together with objective processes and sciences, because I think that's where the hackers work. They're more integrative. I don't know what you guys think here. I would imagine it's probably not quite so controversial that hermetics are correlated with, if we go all the way over here, that are correlated with depth, and that code is correlated with the hipsters, and that hippies then in turn are correlated with this new dimension that we're talking about, the awareness, right? So at least we have those 3 H's, and then we don't really as well, though, have a way to put, I couldn't find a way to put the hackers here, because the hackers didn't seem to go here. So I needed that. I decided to seize on Jared Lucas's suggestion to put harmonizers there, and then to leave the hackers off this particular table. So does anybody have any comments on that?
I don't have any comments specifically on the hackers part. I can kind of, well, just quick on that. Was that because they didn't fit into any of these specific areas that are here?
Yeah, these are the four categories of like psychotechnologies and ecologies of practice that are so
okay.
inner world they're so based on the inner world, and I don't think hackers really do that. Although if you can maybe define the word hacker in a certain way that say that they're trying to hack society, well, then that would go there, right? But they're, you know, they're usually, hackers are working within the objective sphere a lot. So therefore, because I don't yet have this, and in fact, we can create more detailed stuff. I think Greg Henriquez already has, you know, his taxonomies of the tree of knowledge and his periodic table of behavior. Those go in the upper left and upper right and the lower right. I can't remember which is which, but they go there, like to explain here's how that taxonomy works, right? To understand objectivity and, you know, systems thinking, interobjectivity, I like the way he has it, and I think a lot of other people do as well. So I'm looking at how do we understand the inner world? What sort of practices do we go with that? And then also there's this like what kind of people or what sort of metamodern aristocracy subgroup are really good at that sort of practice. And I didn't see hackers fitting into that as well.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, I can imagine they're kind of difficult to put into something like this. Yeah, it kind of reminds me as well of the sort of mapping that I think was done with Jonathan Rowson in the book that I think you probably read, the Time Between Worlds. I noticed there was a similar kind of map from there. So it kind of reminded me of that. It has the same kind of level of thought and sort of consideration of how these different, you know, things map together. And I like it because you can kind of like, people can almost add their own different patterns onto it as well. And it kind of really explores all the different dimensions of these different ways, and also just helps to kind of frame it and talk about it, I think, as well. This actually I think it'd be quite useful for any of the people that are involved in any of these to really be able to see you know, what the different breakups of it are, and even just have it as a kind of reference point to other stuff as well.
Yeah,
It's very cool.
I did base
I would
this.
almost or just quickly, I was almost going to say it'd be I think it'd be quite nice as well to, once you feel like you've got to a good place with this, is almost maybe turn it into some kind of like maybe a shorter kind of graphic or something like that, or something that's like really able to just kind of get some of the key parts across, or maybe just, you know, make it a bit colorful or something, or give some borders or something. But I think that would be a really nice kind of thing.
I'd love to work with some people who have a better aesthetic sense than I do.
I mean, as a spreadsheet, you can't really go wrong, you know. No one's expecting too much of you, Brandon.
Yeah, there's certain talents that I have, and there's certain things that I, you know, do best when I'm working with other people who have talents that are better than me in certain areas, including the aesthetic presentation side of things. And also I did part of this I based on reading that Dispatches from a Time Between Worlds book, what that Jonathan Rowson edited, and there's multiple tables in there, and I think I was earlier in this presentation I was kind of alluding to it, you know, one of the tables that Vervaeke had within his essay, wherein he had all 4 of the P's of knowing as a row in that table. And I was like, okay, so I have kind of half of that, but I have it for like upper left and lower left is. And I'm not sure if you're, Alex, referring to another like table in that book. I can't remember.
I don't think so. I think it was just the yeah. Let me see if I can grab it. There was one. Yeah, this one. You see this? Hold on.
Oh, that, yes.
Yeah. The pickle thing, the reckoning, emergency, crisis, meta crisis. I don't know. I think that almost kind of, I think, is Yeah, it almost makes me wonder if there's a way to simplify some of these parts to make it sort of more, make a sort of shortened version of it, to maybe lead to the main spreadsheet.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
But yeah,
And I'm willing to co-create with
all right.
other people on this.
I'll keep an eye out for some co-creators. This would be good. Get some mapping nerds on this.
Yeah, and so here's another thing. I just added this just a couple days ago. In fact, this maturation, the cleanup, etc. And so some of you guys are familiar with this, where Wilbur has this different kinds of up, where it's grow up, clean up, wake up, show up, and then more recently he added a fifth, which is open up. And this is another situation where one of those I couldn't fit into this table as well. That's the grow up. But the others I think I can. This first one, clean up, that is referring very much to the shadow work, but the interpersonal shadow work, whereas we can generalize the concept of shadow work to refer to a lot of other things outside of not just you, but also a group interpersonal shadow. So that's why I have cleanup there. Wake up seems very much correlated with meditation and being able to have that deeper awareness. Show up very much correlated with having a deeper involvement with the world, and the open up, that's the one that they added more recently, which I think does involve being more capable of deeper communication and enacted interpersonal capability there, rather than holding back. You're also capable, and it's not just like, oh, I'm trying to express myself. It's like you actually develop that capability with code, right? But here's one other thing that I was thinking, okay, I can go to that tab for the I can go to the definitions tab for maturation. I was figuring grow up isn't mentioned, but maybe it's also correlated to the concept of effective value mean, since that's an average. Maybe grow up is the other clean up, wake up, show up, open up, kind of averaged, and that's like kind of effective value meme. I don't know. I'm saying all kinds of controversial stuff here. This is just me coming up with stuff that might or might not be accurate, but it's definitely worth a comment or anything. Does anybody like to speak to any possible, what is there a possible correlation between effective value minimum and this concept of growing up? Well, the fact that Emil didn't come right in and say no means that maybe their answer then is, well, maybe in the coming weeks we might do some research and figure out. All right.
Yeah. Well, the way I understand the grow up is that it's more of like Kohlberg grow up, maturity. That it's not so much, when it comes to, like you said, to grow to higher levels of consciousness, emotional consciousness. Okay, it actually says value mean, but that the way that I understand the grow up is to maturity, and it's it's about responsibility, it's these kind of things. Okay, that I might be conflating too much here, so but then again, it's these the ops when they came out, like what was like a few years back. And I haven't been reading. It's just like, okay, so this is like the new the new mantra that, okay, we should do all these up things. Okay, whatever. Also the whole thing with the clean up your room. Okay, yeah, fine.
Yeah.
When are we going to start the revolution?
Dimitri.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. I'm thoroughly enjoying this. Yeah, trying to wrap my head around it. And to me, it seems so. There's a fifth here, and there was also a fifth in the one of the other rows. So I'm thinking, like, okay, is the growing up somehow related to the complexity part or the depth part? In a sense of, you know, growing up, so you realize a higher level of complexity, and then it's about, okay, accepting it, because, you know, it adds to a further system that you have to deal with, and it might be more effortful. I mean, if you develop your capability, probably you also rise to the occasion, but it might have to do something with the you know, accepting further systems that you become aware of. Yeah, don't know how this fits. And
yeah,
while you were talking, I also had an idea of having this two-dimensional. So if the sheet is one dimension, having a 3D sheet, but that's probably going too far.
the idea though is that these are multiple dimensions. Like, just imagine, like, you know, you have the quadrants, and there just would be a third dimension coming up from there. And there's more than one way to define what that third dimension is. In this case, the third dimension is based on the levels of cognitive thought, and also this where you are on the stack of knowing. And that's essentially where the ground of being is participatory, and then above that you build the perspectival and procedural and propositional. So that's essentially, that's the third dimension, if you can envision that. And I think that, you know, you're right with that, you know, growing up maybe is correlated with things like complexity and depth. And I guess it is a little bit, when they talk about growing up, you know, it's like some people, you know, they go through life and they age, you know, biologically, but there are other aspects of their life that they're really not growing up. And that seems to be based on not just complexity, but also other aspects coming together. So I thought it would be kind of cool if we could essentially, because this concept of growing up isn't really deeply, perfectly defined everywhere, we could define it if we were clever enough to correlate with the effective value meme of Hansi. You know, we could seize it and just redefine it to do that, because the effective value meme is supposed to be kind of an aggregate across those different dimensions to begin with. And I was just suggesting a way to do that. So Emil was pointing out that, you know, this, which I just copy pasted this definition here. If we were to do that, if we were to say grow up is essentially that, you know, way of conveying the concept of effective value mean to a broader audience, we would have to have a corresponding definition that does that. So that's kind of where these come from. Like, you can talk to people who aren't deeply, you know, adept at all of this metamodernism, and you can say, yeah, we want to grow up, we want to clean up in our lives, and that's kind of it. It's part of, like, meet people where they are at in the sophistication spectrum, and that has that so there is probably wiggle room for us to redefine what grow up means so that it comports with the concept of effective value mean. That's just a suggestion. I don't know. Emil.
Yeah, like, the question is also if it's reasonable, like, to fit everything into the same spreadsheet, because you also know that the more stuff you put in there, the greater the chance of getting into trouble is, because if one thing is to be squeezed in there, it also has to fit in with what's like in a row, like 16 rows away. So the question if like, is it reasonable to take everything from the whole field and try to squeeze in? Like, the way I understand these ups is just that, you know, it's like a catchy way of talking about things that we've been talking about for years, you know. So I wouldn't see it as like a theoretical groundbreaking thing. It's just like a catchy way because you can remember them, and then yes, of course, it's about maturity and you know, cleaning up your house and these kind of things. So but may I ask you, like, where did you get the urge to squeeze everything into a spreadsheet?
I don't know. I could ask the same question to Wilbur. How, you know, at the end of Integral Psychology, he's got everything squeezed into a grand schema of a taxonomy of development, and he's got everybody in there. And I'm looking closely at that. I'm like, really? And I don't know. I mean, maybe I've got some of the same genes as he does, or something, for better or worse, you know.
Well, I mean, you know, it can be like a helpful way, like to say, okay, I need to create an overview, like compulsive systematizing, and then it's like helpful to oneself. But I mean, you know, in order to convey this to other, like you would need like also to have like a text, and then like the spreadsheet at the end of that text.
Yeah, I'm working on a book actually. So this is something I was because I've been trying to work on this book. That I ended up putting this spreadsheet together for that, and I kept adding more columns because I was trying to figure out, and that's where I guess the default mindset I have when I was I had the spreadsheet, and then I'm hearing about shadow because I wanted to understand. I'm like, could I fit this in? Whereas other people, I think, would have kind of a default mindset of like, that's probably not going to fit, and I'm probably not going to try unless it really comes off as compelling to me. So because I'm starting with that assumption of where I want to fit things in, unless it really just doesn't, and probably, I'm going to rely on you guys to tell me when things are just gone too far, because otherwise I'm going to try to fit too much into.
But you're kind of like working yourself backwards. It's not that, okay, you have developed these theories, written this book, and then you create a spreadsheet based on that. But it's more that you have created the spreadsheet first, and will you then use that as a help, or will you like actually like just work yourself backward and adapt?
It's actually both. It's actually both. Yeah. So I had a lot of the book already, and I'm creating this spreadsheet because some patterns started appearing for me. But then within that pattern, I'm trying to fit more concepts in to expand it, and then that would then need to go back into the prose of the book that I don't have yet. It's a work in progress.
Well, it's an interesting work. It's probably going to be a train wreck, but hey, like all theories, like we end up in train wrecks anyway. And I'm pretty sure that we can learn something from it, and they can give rise to some fruitful discussions. So I was wondering if you feel satisfied, like with the presentation, and if we should do a quick Q&A if people still have questions.
Yeah. So let me see here. One thing that this is going to be useful, I think. Now, as you're saying, Emil, it could be a train wreck. Like, it's essentially like I'm trying to conflate too much, and the core structure could fall apart. That's a possibility. But probably, I think at least 50% of it is useful. And the neural correlates of biological basis is one thing I don't have yet, because, well, I'm just, I guess, not as interested in that side of things. But there's a whole lot of studies that could be brought into this.
Well, if 50%, well, that's better than average, you know.
But I wanted to work with people who are really interested in this side of things, which is that the connection that this has to neuroscience and biology. And that's unless that is somehow integrated into this table, then it's not. That's going to be kind of a proving ground. If you can do that, then you have that inner world, outer world integration, and I think that would be kind of cool. And I guess that is the end of the presentation here. Well, except for end goals, I mean, I want to talk about this. I mean, we're looking at trying to develop, flow state, optimal grip, coping, enlightenment, contentment, tranquility, and societal harmony. So these kind of seem to correlate in that way. That's we have organizations that specialize in this sort of a thing. The idea is that this could be a map of who is a specialist in these areas. Down the line, I think it would be cool to have who practices these sort of things at a local physical level, and also who you could do video calls with to help hone these practices. And probably at the local level, you'd have more general practitioners, and at the global level, available through video links, those would be the more like world leaders, So that's kind of that. It's one of the things that we could do with this. But I think I'm about done with just the core of the presentation here, and we can open it up to anybody who has any kind of questions or comments. Yes, Dimitri.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you. I can still wrap my head only around half of it because I don't know the other half. So it's thank you for introducing me to it. So I have a lot to learn here. And yeah, I'm only seeing like single concepts which I have heard a bit more about. And so I got stuck on the flow, where, if you know the Flow Genome Project, they came up with 4 types of 4 flow types, or 4 types of people who apply flow in different ways. And so one of them was actually communal. So yeah, one type, kind of person gets into a flow state when they're with other people and harmonizing. But then another is like a flow goer, so just letting it flow and experiencing I mean, probably they all are non-cognitive in optimal state, or probably the cognitive and ego part goes back, but under different circumstances. And the third one was a hard charger, where there's just energy and total action. And the fourth one I'm forgetting. But yeah, so if it might be, if you break some of the concepts apart, that they might fit into several of these also.
Yeah, so what comes to mind for me here is, I think what they're describing as something that these sort of practices that can combine 2 or more of the core, or I'm sorry, the basic granularities of practices. So you're combining, what if you're combining flow with this we space practice, and so each of these could be separated into that granularity and just focus on that. But then the real value comes about when you can create a psychotechnology that integrates these. And that's how I would answer that, what I think the Flow Genome Project has done. Does that make sense then?
So half of it. So yeah, if I understand you correctly, so there's circumstances when you come into flow. This will be one part, but then the other part is, okay, what does it feel like to you, and then the experience in your brain, which you would say is probably what everybody's trying to go to in the lower left, but in different ways. So yeah, it kind of makes sense, but then I have trouble fitting it into the table structure. Yeah, I'll need more thought on that one. But just saying like that, you can split some of these up into several parts. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think what I'm trying to say is that some of these psychotechnologies would combine more than one of these rows simultaneously. And that's the idea. In fact, that is the point of what we're doing here is like, and we can do this. I'm trying to look at like the model of how objective science works and how those sort of paradigms work, because a lot of these scientific paradigms can be broken down into little granular pieces of observation and injunction, and then you create a whole scientific paradigm by bringing those together. So psychotechnologies, I don't know, like inner development psychotechnologies, the idea is maybe they can be broken down into granularities as well, where there is an interpersonal flow is a foundational component that can be brought into a larger psychotechnology, and also the participatory enacted we space is another granularity, and then you can combine that with flow, and that's maybe one of the things that is in the Flow Genome Project's taxonomy of different kinds of flow. Those combine these granularities together into a larger psychotechnology. So they don't live, some of those psychotechnologies isn't going to necessarily live just within one of these 4 rows that I have. And I might then need to subdivide the rows even more so to really get to the clear granularities. And then another thing this comes to mind for me is some people are probably going to disagree with this whole approach of finding granularities. So there's a whole discussion around that. And I think it could be useful to do this so that we can get, we can develop these communities around this better when we recognize how these psychotechnologies work and how they are constructed and how they can be measured in terms of how useful they are. That's one approach. I think there are people out there who are probably going to just disagree altogether with this sort of like attempts to bring a measure of empirical science to the whole concept of inner development. Some people are going to disagree with that, but I think that it's worth someone trying to make the case for things doing this. I'm trying to make the case that we could do things this way, and it's worth exploring that path.
I mean, you can always at least start with self-report surveys and then see if the people sort themselves to preferences, so that's not too invasive. That's still already empirical. Yeah.
This is just another way of getting a certain kind of semi-empirical side of it, because the self-report surveys, it's a little bit difficult to see what are you referring to. So I'm saying, okay, well, you're referring to a certain kind of core, a certain granularity of inner world practice. And the psychotechnology probably combines multiple of these practices together in some sort of way. And I want to be able to unwind that so we can look at what works and what doesn't work. At least I don't know if this is going to be effective, but this is a path I'm going down, and I think it's worth exploring.
Yeah, I find also it might be very useful to give people either to show preferences or to show certain kind of people experience one kind of technology in a certain way that gives them pleasure or other things that you can then actually also measure in a neuroscientific way. So but for me the obvious next step would be to group people who like a certain practice and then see, okay, maybe other commonalities in this way, and can we have a recommendation, and then Yeah, and then see what follows from there. Getting a larger group, and I mean, putting on empirical studies on this is easy, but yeah.
Yeah, it's worth a whole
I see definitely value there,
discussion about how to integrate this with objective science, and that's a little bit out of scope of what we are talking about today. But if and that's a big if there is some accuracy to the table I have, then it could be used toward that larger project down the line. So, does anybody else have any questions here? Yes, Joseph.
Hi, I was wondering if you thought about how this maps to personality theory. Perhaps I'm already seeing some ways that like maybe the 10 aspects of the big five theory might fit into some of these.
I don't think I have yet. I think probably, if anything, it would be that some personality types are more adept at these practices just naturally. And for other people with other personality types, you can take a particular, thing that they're not going to be as naturally good at. Some people, for example, are more social, and therefore the more social side of things, they're going to be able to do better, more easily, just more naturally. And for some other people, they're just really good at the inner exploration, the intrapersonal. And so there's different taxonomies of those of the personality types. And so some of them seem to be more intuitively working with these, what I'm calling zone 1 or zone 2. And that's kind of how I would answer that. Does that make sense? What do you think?
Yeah, I was just thinking when you said about how to get at this kind of neurological, biological basis, that might be a way to kind of dig into that.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought about it in terms of the system 1 and system 2 before, but some of them seem to be just having a quick look at like the 10 aspects. Yeah, some of them seem to be more system 1, like maybe politeness within agreeableness, like the politeness ones maybe are more system 1, and then the compassion ones are more like system 2. And within openness, like values, perhaps zone 4, and yeah, ideas and actions, maybe 1 or 2. Yeah, I can already kind of see how they might map in, and these things do tend to factorize in the way that kind of Dimitri was just talking about. They might factor into a similar way with the zones that you have.
Yeah, indeed. And I should say that, there is disagreement within the psychological sciences about how scientific personality types are. And I think the one that has the most has the most credibility within the scientific community is the Big Five, which I can understand to also have a connection to the one that's most popular, which is the Myers-Briggs. I think that there is a connection, and you can almost see the Myers-Briggs as a little bit of an approximation of the Big Five in a certain way. But then also in more recent years, they've had there's the so-called new Big Five, which allows for these to be. It has a little more of a connection, I think, to neuroscience, and Greg Henriquez has his character adaptation systems, wherein the biological basis, the genetic basis, the biological context, the genetic context, and the behavioral context are all capable of kind of changing your personality type or determining your personality type over the course of your life, especially in early years, so that's really interesting. And one thing that's really interesting to me is if there could be more of a neurological biological basis for Greg Henriquez's unified theory of knowledge, because I don't think it's quite there yet. And then I'm also seeking to have more about neurological biological basis for this this taxonomy that I have here. Any follow-up?
No, I'm just yeah, interesting. I think, yeah, I've been looking into these kind of the brain structure correlations with the 5 aspects, and yeah, I've been looking at that recently, and there's a lot of overlaps with like mindfulness and relationships and things. So I think it could fit in. I'm gonna have a look if I can kind of section that into your
Cool.
table. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'm looking for people to co-create with me on this. And one thing actually I'd like to do is somehow get a grant to be able to spend more time working on this, and also related materials, you know, like in the book that I'm writing, which I think could have utility for, you know, the larger metamodern projects that we have underway. I'm offering this. In fact, what I did, I put together another spreadsheet where I took, you know, what is in the Nordic ideology and just put it into a spreadsheet of the 6 new forms of politics. And most of it, I just really copy and pasted from what was already there. And then I added core frameworks for each of those, which, you know, for some of the core frameworks, in fact, were mentioned in the Hansi books, like for the democratization, you have sociocracy, and I'm not sure if liquid democracy was mentioned there, but I put it into that table. But when it got to the existential politics, I'm offering this table as a core framework there for that. Or maybe if it turns out that this table is not really, you know, accurate, then there would need to be a different core framework somewhere if we could find that. So that's what I have, and I'm going to actually post that to the Metamodern forum, so you guys could chime in and add comments to that as well. So I think maybe just one more question. We might have time for one more. Does anybody have any other comments or questions? Yes, Dimitri.
Yeah, I mean, thinking of psychology, yes, the big 5. I was thinking introversion and extroversion wasn't obvious for me. For looking at the inner side and the outer side of things, and then also with the MBTI, where your preferred information would come from, either from the outer world or from the inner world. I mean, this would be for me an obvious relation to get there, but I don't know if the others would work in as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably worth a whole discussion on how different personality theories could somehow correlate with what I'm offering here. And so I think probably got to take off in a minute here. What I'm gonna post this recording. I'll go ahead and stop the recording.